Okay, so that's the learning objectives we're going to be looking at today. So really what it means to work as a maternity nurse. And that still covers a night nurse, a night nanny as well. So people who I know are wanting to do this work, but just at night. There are a few things that are a little different, but fundamentally we're talking about the same thing. So the first thing to consider is that you'll be self-employed. So can I ask, who at the moment considers themselves to be self-employed or has been in the past?
I've been both, but yeah,
Yep.
more recently self-employed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have.
I am self-employed at the moment.
Okay.
Me too, I am.
So most of you then, this should be things that you're already doing. So the reason why maternity nurses and night nannies tend to be considered as self-employed by HMRC, as opposed to nannies who are almost always considered employed, is because it's that multiple short-term contracts. You're going from one family to another, to another, to another, and you are setting your own working conditions. So whereas a nanny gets employed by a family generally for a period of months and years, and the family set the contract, they then will also be responsible for paying her tax and national insurance through the PAYE system. Maternity nurses, you are in charge of your own employment because you're choosing whether to work with a client or not, and then you go to another client after that, you go to another client after that. You're offering them a service and you are setting the boundaries for your own employment. So you as the maternity nurse, the one going and saying, oh no, I don't do cooking, or I don't do this. This is how I work. Whereas a nanny, you are there going into the family, and obviously you choose whether to work with that family or not, but they are the one who set the conditions of employment. We'd like you to work from 8 till 6 every day, apart from in the holidays when I'm home, I'd like you to work only 8 till 5. So they get to tell you more about what you're doing. So hopefully those of you who are or have been self-employed are very familiar with the HMRC websites and know how to register. And if you haven't, easiest way is just to phone them up and tell them you're going to be working self-employed. And then each year you're filling in a tax return, which isn't as scary as it sounds for maternity nurses, because there's very little in the way of changes to money. So when you're building a business where you're selling, you're buying materials, you're selling materials at a different rate. There's lots of different things going on there. And with a maternity nurse, fundamentally, you're taking your income in from the family, the thing you're charging or invoicing for, but there aren't many other charges that you're going to be putting on your tax return. This training should go on your tax return. So this is a business expense. If you are having an accountant do your accounts for you, that will be a business expense. So we are definitely not here to give tax advice. That would be a very bad thing for me to be doing. And I'd get into lots of trouble if I told you anything wrong. So fortunately, the HMRC has a great helpline. They're really good on the phone, but they also have some really useful videos. So when you get this out as a PDF, you'll be able to click on the link and go to all of their videos to have a look and see how to do different things, what you can claim for, what you can't. But I'm not a qualified accountant, so I'm not going to be telling you exactly what you can and can't claim for, although training I would definitely be putting down. So you need to keep simple records, and it only does need to be simple, of income versus expenditure. So if you are out on a job and you're buying your own food, or you're on your day off whilst working abroad and you're having to buy food because you're not at home, you're in another country, you'll be keeping a list of all of those expenditures. And in another place, you'll be keeping a list of all the income, the money that families pay you. And it's generally a good idea to keep around 20% or so of your income back, however you want to do it, in a savings account under the bed, doesn't bother me, ready to pay tax because it's paid in arrears. So you pay it after the year. It's due after the year that it's been earned in. So you keep all of your proofs, and the link at the bottom there for self-employed records, what to keep, will tell you exactly what you should be doing. An idea, if it's something you're not particularly keen on managing yourself, is to have an app like QuickBooks, which is a simple app that it links to your bank account, and you kind of swipe, a bit Tinderish, you swipe left or right, I can't remember which one is good, but one for personal accounts and two for business accounts. So, oh, that's something I bought at Boots for myself, swipe this way. That's something I bought at Boots for my clients, swipe this way. And it then files it under money that's nothing to do with your business and money that's your business. So that's helpful if you're not running a separate bank account simply for your business, which many of us won't be because our incomes won't really justify that. So that is actually, again, it's an offsettable cost. You might know or want to get to know an accountant and ask them to do your accounts each year. And you'd simply, in that case, be handing them basically a list of receipts or a book of receipts and go, this is what's come in. And then your invoice is, this is what's, you know, what parents have paid me. So that's another option. So I'm not going to really take any questions on the self-employed bit because I'm not an accountant. The HMRC are your friend for that.
There is, I think you can, with the HMRC, organise something that you pay in monthly as well.
Yes, you can, if you choose to. You can put up payments in advance. So although your tax is due in arrears, so the tax for, when are we now? 2020?
April, yeah.
So the tax that was earned from April 2019 up to April 2020 will become due on the 31st of January coming up. Yeah. But if you want to, you can set up a direct debit. They'll help you work out roughly what they think your tax bill will be. You can then pay it in monthly instalments, and at the end of the year they do an adjustment and either give you some back or you pay a little more if you have earned a lot more than you expected. And if you do that, you can actually go in mid-year and go, we need to make an adjustment now because my income has increased. You know, I've put my fees up by a lot and I'm going to be expecting a lot more in. Or I'm taking a big break, maternity leave, for example. So let's take those monthly payments down because I know I'm going to be under the tax threshold this year. So yeah, that's another way you can do it if you're going for the not under the bed option.
So I can't.
Alethea, you've just dropped in.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I'm just got in from work, so just
no worries. I'll just click you onto the register. So I've got the records right. All good. Yeah, join us in person when you're ready. So pay. This is always super contentious because there are no rules on this. As a maternity nurse, you charge what you want. And there's obviously a huge balance between what clients are wanting to pay, what you're wanting to charge, and what other people are doing. And if you go on any maternity nurse forum, every few weeks we'll have someone pop up and go, so what would you charge for? And the rate variations are super different. So things that you'll need to take into account is that the money you charge is gross. That means that tax and national insurance need to come out of the money you're charging. Whereas, so when you're in employment, they will take all that off for you, and your take-home pay is just for you. When you're self-employed, you need to allow for those costs at the end of the year. Your travel time and costs. So any time that is traveling is time that you are not working. So you need to consider whether and how you want to add for those. If you are a night nanny, for example, and you are going to a family across the other side of London, you could easily be spending an hour in your car or on the tube, which, if you don't charge for it at all, will take your hourly rate down in real terms, because you might have done a 10-hour night but been away for 12 hours. So thinking about this, and if you charge it separately to the family, you then can't claim back off tax. If you don't charge it separately to the family, you can then claim the mileage as per the HMRC rules. So there are pros and cons, and an accountant will be the right person to advise you what's right for you. So food, many people who are working 24/6 or 5 as a maternity nurse will expect the client to be buying and providing you with the food. So you are thinking about your rate, thinking, well, I'm not paying for food for myself. Some people, particularly if you have a particular diet, say you have some intolerances and you want to really be careful that you're buying food that's just right for you, then you might want to buy your own food, but you'd then be charging the client directly for what you've bought, or putting it into your rate and saying it's an all-inclusive rate, a bit like an all-inclusive package holiday. So again, you can make those choices for yourself because you're self-employed. So just like a holiday company can say all inclusive, you just turn up and you've paid your £500 and that's it, nothing's extra. Or they might say it's all inclusive except drinks and you have to pay those on top. Or they might say they're charging you for flights and accommodation. Or they might say they're charging you for just accommodation. It's the same as a maternity nurse. You get to choose what's included, what's extra, and what you fund yourself. Your business costs have to come into what you're charging. So it's not just about your hourly rate, thinking about what do you need in terms of paying the rent, the mortgage, and the bills. It's about thinking, well, I need to cover my insurance, I need to cover training costs, making sure I'm updated, marketing, Facebook ads, website costs, all of that needs to be factored in to what you're going to be charging, because no one else is going to pay this for you. The fact that you don't get any money when you're not working is a big one. So when you are employed, you will have some respite back to some sick pay if you are not working, and there will be some holiday pay built into that. Technically, if you are self-employed, after a certain time you can claim statutory sick pay, which is about £70 a week. And when I broke my arm, I found this out the hard way, and it took about 6 to 8 weeks for them to agree to then pay £70 a week, by which time I was ready to go back to work. So it was a very, very tiny amount that clearly wouldn't have paid my bills. Frankly, wouldn't have paid my, for food for the whole family. So you have to put in enough in your rate to build up your own safety net. However your financial safety net needs to work, needs to take into account the fact that when you don't work, you don't get paid. So when people query rates compared to nanny rates, nannies will get paid if they are sick, they will get paid for a certain amount of holiday each year. So your rate has to be higher so that effectively you can pay yourself for 4 weeks holiday and pay yourself to assume you're going to be sick for maybe 10 days a year, if that was the average. The other thing you don't have is a company or workplace pension. So keep referring to nannies because it's probably the most similar. Even a nanny at the moment would have a workplace pension because their employer, even if it's just one family, is still technically an employer and has to conform to the law and offer a workplace pension, where the employer pays a small contribution and then the employee can pay a small contribution. So that does not happen with maternity nurses. You are completely responsible for your own pension if you choose to have one. So again, you're thinking of that in your rate, that you want to be paying something in because your employer, the client, isn't paying anything in. And you also need to consider where you're going to live. I don't want to use the word younger, but many maternity nurses who don't have family commitments, that would be a better way to put it, unlike me with 2 teenagers, will choose to work from position to position and in between sofa surf with friends or go back to their parents perhaps. But for most of us past that stage or with families of our own, we need to keep a house or home of our own for when we are not working or for our families. So although you're living in with a client as a maternity nurse for the majority of the time, you still need to pay for and maintain your own home. So that's something to, again, be factored in to the costs. Any questions on that page?
Can we ask, I can't remember her name, who's coming on, about pay?
Yeah, that's one of the things we will be chatting about, and we'll be going on to it in the next few slides as well. So hopefully my aim is to try and get through most things now so that we can ask her the extra questions, but the basics have been covered. So pay rates, you've got to say, where am I going to start? When you are finding your own work, so clients are coming to you because you worked with their friend and they've recommended you, you tend to set a higher rate than agencies will tolerate. Because of course agencies are also putting a finder's fee on, they are charging something to the client. So if you think about it from a client's point of view, if they just go to you direct, they found your website, or they saw you in a parent group, or their friend knows you. They're just paying you. When a client goes to an agency, they are paying a fee to the agency, so they'll generally be expecting your rate to be a little lower because of their money that they've allocated for this. Part of it's gone to the agency. So agency fees tend to be lower than maternity nurses who are gaining work simply through word of mouth or by themselves by their website. So this was a sample literally from the last few weeks up on the web. So where their job was, whether it was twins, if it was twins, how long it was for, and the rates they were paying. And those are generally higher rates. So these are ones which are towards the upper end of the scale rather than the lower. But when you go to an agency, can you see it says 200 to 250? That's what the client has told the agency they're prepared to pay. But you as the maternity nurse say to the agency, what is your rate? So you might read that job, go 200 to 250, I'm going to go in at 220. And the agency then pass that information on to the parent. They'll pass on your CV and your rate. The agency don't tell you what you charge, you tell them. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So Silent Night private staff are the same people who run Manta training. Okay, so they're our linked agency. And this is a guide directly from their website about, so this is what parents will be seeing about what they think rates should be. So you'll see their rates are slightly lower than some of the jobs on the previous page and slightly higher for some. So it tends to be that maternity nurses charge more for twins and more for triplets. You're self-employed, so you choose whether to do that or not. And often, because it looks good on your CV to have twin or triplet work, often maternity nurses will actually work for slightly less to get the experience on their CV, if that makes sense. So you're doing a job that will help you in the future, because parents are like, wow, she can cope with triplets, she must be amazing. But to get that work, you're then charging a little less than perhaps you would. And of course, something to always bear in mind is that families who have triplets are not magically richer. So there's an ethical thing there that you might want to consider about whether it feels right for you to charge more for twins and triplets because there are more babies you are looking after, or whether it feels right for you to set a rate and that's the rate at which you work for a family. And that's your decision as someone who's self-employed. But yeah, triplet families aren't necessarily richer, they just had multiples. And statistically are more likely, of course, to have spent thousands of pounds on IVF to get these gorgeous babies. Because it's more likely that they're IVF babies than natural, although it is absolutely possible to have twins naturally and triplets naturally. It's more likely that maybe they've been putting a lot of money into getting pregnant.
A lot.
Sorry?
I said a lot of money.
Yeah, it is a lot of money, isn't it? And so obviously you're not going to ask that to the family, but just to bear in mind, these may be babies who have been very, very, very wanted.
Yeah.
And that, you know, the families have been on a long journey to get there.
Yeah.
Okay. But what Manta or Silent Night also put is a newly qualified maternity nanny kind of role. So this is aimed at people who have done this training but haven't worked very much or at all as a maternity nurse itself, to try and build up your CV. So these rates are significantly lower. Think of it a bit like an apprenticeship rate. So some training course providers, when they do this, they say that they will offer you voluntary work experience. With Silent Night, they prefer not to go with the voluntary work experience, but a lower paid, so you are getting paid something for the work experience. But again, this would be CV building rates. And often they are not for the long jobs. They're not for the 12-week jobs. They're for a few days or a few weeks to start to get some references down and some experience on that CV. So that's why the rates there are lower. Okay. Any questions on those two pages? I'll flick back to the one which is for the more experienced maternity nurses. But of course, as it says, you know, people can charge what they want. So 270 isn't particularly high, and someone like Karen is going to be charging significantly more than that with her experience. Something else to bear in mind, and we'll see this on maternity nurse forums, is the minimum wage debate, that you are working for 20 hours out of the 24, and taking a low maternity nurse rate can be equivalent, actually make you equivalent to less than the national minimum wage. As a self-employed person, the minimum wage does not legally apply to you because you are setting the wage, not the employer. So there is a movement within maternity nurses to not accept work for less than what would be the minimum wage, or indeed for less than about £10 an hour equivalent, which if you look at a 24-hour job would be roughly a £200 per day salary or per 24-hour salary. So that's a movement within maternity nursing that I want you sort of to be aware of, that these decisions have to be yours, and there will be a balance between a higher rate of pay and getting booked out. And particularly when you are new and you haven't got a client list of people who are recommending you, that balance will be different in terms of getting the work because your CV isn't as long. And when you've been in this game slightly longer, you can have a higher rate and still get booked out because enough parents are recommending you to their friends and their friends and their friends. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions on that? Okay. So when you're writing your contract, you need to think of things like bank holidays. Commonly, it's time and a half. Some maternity nurses charge double pay. But you decide whether you prefer the money or the time. So a maternity nurse who actually their partner and their kids will be off on the bank holiday Monday and they'd really prefer to have a longer weekend and be home with them might say, I'm going to charge you double time. And that's kind of putting the parents off a little bit from having you on that day because it's a bit more money, a lot more money. A maternity nurse who hasn't got a family at home that day because her family are working, or nothing else is happening, or the bank holiday isn't one that fits in with her religious or cultural beliefs, so it's just another day, might have a time and a half rate to encourage the family to book her on that day. So you make the decisions that are right for you. So no one is going to say you have to work at Christmas. And if Christmas is not a big deal in your family, then you might charge a slightly lower rate, so maybe just time and a half over that Christmas period to get the work in. If, however, Christmas is the highlight of your family calendar and missing it would be, a really big deal, you're prepared to do it, but it will be a big deal, you'd put your rates up, so maybe Christmas Day and Boxing Day are 3 times as much. So that if you do end up working, you're only working for, seriously model wouldn't get out of bed for 10,000 grand sort of job. So you're choosing your rate based on what you want to do and whether the time is more important or the money is more important. And you don't have to justify that to anyone. That is just your choice. Because you're self-employed, you can say to the family, I don't do this or I do this. And if you know you've got a family who are birthing in sort of late November, you'll have that thought before you give them your contract, because your contract you can change for each family. So if you know they're having a late November baby and you've got Christmas with nothing on and no one else is at home, offer a lower rate over Christmas because you're more likely to get booked. But if you'd really, really prefer that the job, you want the job, but you prefer it was finished on December the 24th, put it down as, 3 times your rate for Christmas, because then if you do end up working, you'll feel it was worth your while. Where you are in the country will decide what rate you can have. So New York, probably one of the higher paying places to be. 350 in pounds sterling a day would be very usual for New York. So you can really get more money there. Obviously green card visa things that you need to sort out, and that depends on each person's individual citizenship and situation. London will pay more than other areas in the UK. Kensington jobs will tend to pay more than Stratford jobs. So follow the money, and wages tend to go up where the area is richer, and for certain cities in the world as well. When you are working abroad, unless, and I don't mean like, Marie, if you're working in your own country, just not the UK. I mean, if you are traveling to work somewhere other than the UK or somewhere other than your home, then you're going to be charging more because you have not got the option of staying at your own home on your days off. You can't see your friends in your time off. Phone calls home, you know, would be more expensive. So you are going to charge a higher rate generally for being abroad if that's an inconvenience to you. If you want the work abroad, because what you're really looking for at the moment is to do some traveling, then you'll come in with a lower rate, because the benefit for you is being able to travel and to, you know, to have maybe take 2 days off in the middle and go somewhere, you know, nearby but interesting. So you're always balancing your needs against the money that is coming in and saying where sits right for you. If you are working abroad though, it's really important that the client pays for the things that I've listed. So we always expect clients to pay door to door for that travel. When you're working as a maternity nurse, say if you're in the maternity nurse work is in Kensington and you live in Ealing, you may choose to either not charge for travel or to charge a very small amount. But when you're working abroad, you're expecting them to do door-to-door travel for you. You'll obviously offer generally a more cost-effective way. So you wouldn't necessarily expect a taxi from your home in Nottingham to Gatwick. You expect to take the train. But it does depend on the job. So, you know, when I've gone out and it's been a longer job and I've got a lot of luggage, yes, I will have a private car home, because I don't want to be after a 18-hour flight dragging across London with, you know, 3 big suitcases. So in my contract there was, yes, there will be a private car from the airport to my home. You do expect the family to pay for your travel insurance, for any immunisations or visas that you would require, for them to sort that out. The insurance that you will have as a maternity nurse in the UK generally will not cover you when you are abroad. So you will need to ask the family to support you to get the appropriate insurance for their country. But if you invest in maternity nurse insurance here, generally speaking, it won't cover you for work abroad. If you need any medical checks or so forth, again, the family should be covering this. A COVID related thing now, if the family are asking you to isolate for 2 weeks before you come to them, you should be being paid for that, because it's 2 weeks where you cannot work and you're self-employed, no one else is going to pay you. So again, dependent on the job, you would decide whether you are charging that at full rate because you could be working with another family, or half rate, a bit like a retainer, because you're knowing you're going to be using that time for things that suit you. So again, it's about you setting the rules for yourself. When you take a booking, it's really important to take a booking deposit. Usually we say that this is equivalent to a week's salary. Longer term jobs, it might be more. So you don't want to, sign up for 4 months and just have 1 week's deposit. What you're guarding against is the client changing their mind towards the last minute and you not being able to work. And that's then 4 months where you're going to be having to try and find other work. The booking deposit is generally taken as the last week's pay. So instead of invoicing for the last week, you'll say that's the deposit money that you've already paid me. Maternity nurse on the forums just today made the mistake of agreeing for the family to use it as her first week's pay. And then when they've come back to her and said, oh, we don't need you for next week now, we're going to finish your contract early, she had nothing to stand on, because she couldn't, she can charge them for it, but they may not pay. And then she'll be taking them to the small claims court because she'd already used her deposit as the first week's pay. So using it as the last means if they've decided to change the terms of the contract at the end and you're not happy with them and you don't want to go down the full small claims route hog, you just keep that deposit because they haven't kept to their side of the contract. Your choice whether you invoice the client weekly, in advance or arrears. When you're abroad, I strongly recommend you do it in advance. And when you're abroad, strongly recommend that you hold on to your own passport and you have your own flight details home. So they can pay for it, but it is booked in your name so that you retain the ability to get home. And what I'll sometimes do if I have any misgivings or the country I'm going to might be more difficult to get home from is before the contract starts, I'll say, well, this is the cost of the flight home. Please transfer that cost to me now and I will book it, so that I retain all of the ability, if it went really pear-shaped in a country I didn't want to be on, to phone the airline and go, get me home now. And because the booking's in my name, it will be easier than if the booking's been made by the family. So, you know, think about that. If you're in Spain, this is not going to be a big problem getting home. If you're in the Middle East, it's going to be quite expensive and more difficult. So you make those decisions based on who the family is and where you're going and what connections you have around. Any questions on that? Everybody's just silently taking things in today. So contracts, you write your own contract and the client signs it. Or if they don't agree to it, you don't work with them. It's not a negotiation process when it comes to contract stage. So in the interview, you might have a bit of back and forth of what works for you and what works for them. They were wanting 24/7. You're telling them that's not safe, but you will work 24/6. But the contract itself is your document, not theirs. So if you send them their contract and you get it back with lots of red pen of changes, that's a big red flag. Do you actually want to be working for this family? So there'll be situations where you'll go, oh, actually, this family, you know, their wife's a lawyer, and actually she's made some really good additions because she's using her professional knowledge to help me. Most of the time, though, it's going to be families who are going to be super picky on what they want, and you're going to end up bending and bending and bending and changing, which is not going to end up suiting you. So if your contract comes back with lots and lots of changes, remind them it's not their contract to change, and consider perhaps whether it's the right job for you.
Is that still the case if you are employed by an agency?
Yeah, the agency is not your employer. Think of the agency a bit like an insurance broker. So they bring you and the client together, and they will charge the client a fee for doing that. Then they leave you on your own to sort out that contract.
Okay.
And good agencies will be there to support. And if they did do that, you'd come back to the agency and go, this has happened, I'm not happy. Yeah. But the contract itself is not between you and the agency, it's between you and the client.
Okay.
So it'd be good to be able to rely on agencies to help us out in all those situations. And the good ones will, but not all of them will, and not all of the time. The client will also have a written contract with the agency. So for example, if they want to extend, they will then be due to pay the agency an additional fee. And it's never clever to try and work with the client to undercut that, because the agency is going to get you a lot more work than the client ever will.
Yeah.
So if you have a client saying, yeah, I'd love to extend your contract, or could we not charge the agency, tell the agent, because they're going to charge me this much. No, that's not professional. It's not appropriate. And the agency will find out. It always gets back to people, because if the client's willing to undercut the agency and tell you that, they're very willing to go back to the agency and tell them something about you. So definitely a no, don't go underhand with that. It'll always come back to bite you on the bum. So your contract is going to include things like the details of you and the client, always a good one. Be really clear what their names are and where they live and what their phone numbers are. You need this detail. The dates where you're going to be booked. When you are choosing with a family the date that you should start, really depends what the family is wanting. Typically, babies do not come on their due dates. So I think we've talked about this in the newborn bit, didn't we? That a term baby is anything from about 37 to 42 weeks. That's 5 weeks where you may or may not be needed. So usually maternity nurses are either booked for about 41 and a half weeks gestation, where most babies will be out by then, and the parent just copes until you come, or you are booked for 40 weeks gestation, and if the baby hasn't come, which is quite likely, you charge a retainer, generally 50% of your daily rate, because from the moment you're booked from that day, you can't do any other work, as in you can't go and work for another family because you've got a baby to come that night. So you need to charge them something, but generally you'll be doing your own thing, and so you don't charge a daily rate. But it's up to you. If you are very clear that actually no, you want your full pay, thank you, and they really want to book you from before you think baby will get here, fine, they'll pay you full rate. So it's up to you as a self-employed person to decide what works for you. And often in contracts, people will say that they'll try and be flexible if possible. If baby arrives early and I am free, I will come to you early, but not making a promise. Because between now and then, you may have a client who you're doing, wonderfully with, and they actually are asking to extend you for a few weeks until you're booked next date. Because people are often booking you several months in advance and things change. So generally, either book from 40 weeks and have either a retainer or full pay from then, or book from 41 and a half, and again, you're expecting baby to be there around then. If baby comes early, you'll go to them if you're free and if it suits you. Generally, if a baby is preterm, so before 37 weeks, they will be staying in hospital for some time. Often, if they're particularly preterm, until around 40 weeks gestation anyway. So you don't really need to think about situations where what happens if baby comes at 35 weeks, because that baby's still going to be in a hospital probably. You're going to include your rate of pay, what happens on bank holidays, what happens for work outside the country, what happens for additional hours. So if you are having a typical model of 24 hours working and 4 hours of that is your break, but you're happy to be flexible occasionally, so say it's your break from 8 until 12, but mum has a doctor's appointment and she just wants to go to the doctor and leave the baby with you, you'll need an additional hourly rate in there to cover that time. Too many people don't agree that and then end up doing lots of extra hours and not charging any extra pay. Cancellation policies. So you are still under distance selling regulations if you are doing the majority of this contract on the phone or on the internet and not signing in their house. So read up on that and put in a cancellation policy, but actually you've got to be careful that if they cancel within 14 days and you fell under distance selling because you went and met them, came away, and then they phoned you up and said, yes, we'd like to go ahead, and you then drew up the contract in your own home and emailed it to them, that means they've got a 14-day cooling off period. And in that, it's illegal to charge them the deposits. You'd have to give them the deposit back unless you've started the work. So if they interviewed you in their house, you then came away and they phoned and said, yes, please, you drew up the contract to start next week, because this is a last minute booking. You did 2 days and then they cancelled you. You wouldn't be able to get the whole of your deposit back because you have done some work there. So you would need to charge them, you'd need to work it out as what's appropriate for the work that's done. Yeah? So be aware, distance selling regulations apply to you. Look them up or speak to a solicitor or accountant. Generally, though, we have cancellation policies in place so that people can't just change their minds or, more likely, find someone cheaper. So once they've paid, once they're out of that distance selling, generally your cancellation policy will say, if you shorten the booking or cancel the booking, you pay me the full rate. Because being self-employed, you can't just magic up extra work. Often people will have a clause in there or an unofficial guideline that if the baby has died, they either won't charge or will charge a nominal amount. Fortunately, it's very rare that that happens, but it's your choice what you do. It's really, really an unthinkable situation for the family, but you cannot necessarily pay your rent that month if they've not paid you. So there's a balance there between the family's needs and your needs. And thankfully, those situations are very rare. And you would make, often people put in their contracts is full refunds would be given or addressed on a case-by-case basis. So if the mum has been significantly ill in hospital and it's been very delayed, maybe you choose just to charge the retainer until she's ready. But these things are within your power because you're the one that is owning this contract. But obviously where we can, where parents are in a really, really horrible, difficult situation, we would ask to see proof, because parents can lie sometimes, but we'd then obviously try and work out what's, you know, best for you and best for the parent in that circumstance. There's no one rule for that. In your contract, you should put your duties, what you will and won't do, your conditions, including things like where you'll sleep on time off. So if you're generally expecting to be in the baby's bedroom with them overnight, when you're sleeping in your time off, which might be 9 till 12, say in the morning, you'll want to know that that is your room to sleep in. The baby will be elsewhere, that you're not going to be disturbed. It's not got all of the changing mats in there so that mum's knocking on the door and you're trying to sleep and she's trying to get the nappies. So you need to think about where you will spend time when you've got time off, having things about what the meal expectations are going to be. And that sort of thing is where you'd expect to negotiate that prior to putting it in your contract. So you talk to the family, you know, are you wanting me to share meals with you as a family? Are you wanting me to cook for myself? And you'll negotiate that and then put it in your contract. Would expect you to have a clause on confidentiality in your contract, as we've discussed in the training, and a safeguarding clause that clearly says, if something bad happens, I will go to social care, fundamentally, is what you're saying in that clause. Your contact details and your next of kin. If you got sick or something happened to you, your employer or your clients would need to know who to contact if they needed someone. So do put your next of kin's details in there. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but the day you end up in hospital with a broken leg because you slipped on the floor of their baby's room, you want them to be phoning someone and getting them there for you. So pop it in. You need to include how to pay, including your bank details or any international bank transfer details. You will need something on GDPR, i.e. how you're going to take care of their personal data. And you put in any disclaimers there that you need to. So if the parent has clearly said that they want you to do this and you know it's against guidelines, that would be the place to put in your disclaimer. Okay. Any questions there? Okie doke. So these are other things that you will need. Proof of ID. So that is to match up who you say you are with who you are for agencies or for clients against your DBS. So generally a passport or a driving license, same as for anything else. A form for administering and recording medication and accidents. You can get these off the internet, off childminder websites. You'll need something. If you give that child Calpol, you want the parent to sign to say they know you've given that child Calpol. If the child has a bumped head, as you know, does happen occasionally, you'll want to sign to say what happened and the parent to sign to say they acknowledge that this has happened to their child. So simple, very simple forms for that. If you're using your car for work, you'd want business insurance for it. You will need insurance, public liability. That covers if something happens because of you being there. So that would cover if you dropped their iron and scorched their carpet. That insurance would cover you. Professional indemnity is if you told them something and they misunderstood you and they tried to sue you because of that. So there are two different types of insurance. Professional indemnity is because we are to some extent giving advice. We're saying try this with your child. So professional indemnity says if you say try this with your child and it went wrong, this is the insurance that they would go to. And I've listed some different providers that you can go to. They're not recommendations. They are providers to look into. So Morton Michelle is probably the most well known in this field. Manny Insure is a newer comer, but used quite a lot. Pacey is an organisation, a professional organisation for child carers, mostly for childminders, but it does go over others. And if you have membership with them, you get access to their insurance. And childcare.co.uk is a website where you can find clients. And if you pay for their gold membership, it is quite expensive, but it then comes with insurance. So they're all different options to look into, and you'll need to give your details and get a quote that's right for you. You'll need to keep any relevant certifications, like the certificate you'll get when you pass this assignment after our course. Your paediatric first aid certificate, which generally will be renewed every 3 years. References. So having a form that you send out to each client at the end of a job makes it much easier than trying to chase them by email. So I tend to, at the end of a job, send the thank you email. Here's your final invoice, shows you've all paid. And here's the form inviting you to write a reference and asking the tick box, are they happy for other parents to contact them? And particularly with agencies, they'll want to see quite a long list of references to contact to make sure you're who you say you are. Parents that you're working with direct will generally want to speak to perhaps the last 2 people you were working with. A CV, it's usual to list your jobs with brief details. Some maternity nurses have just the longest, like 30-page CVs with every job they've ever been in. And it's kind of the same, you know, looked after a kid, looked after another kid, also more kids looked after. So I tend to do the last 12 months in depth. These were the ages, this was the length of time, this was the place, and then group before then. So that I have also worked with 6 families of twins I've worked with, and parents can go back and ask for those details if they want, but I don't send them a 30-page document just as a standard, which sometimes will happen. Agencies may well ask for your CV and put it into their own format. A DBS check is the new name for, not very new, it used to be called a CRB check, a police check. It's recommended and many agencies will require it, but if you're working parent to parent, it's not a requirement. Legally speaking, you don't have to have it. But Silent Night, if you're working with them, will help you to get that. And it's simply a police record to say that there's nothing on file against you in terms of working with children or convictions that might be relevant. It's not about, you know, you were once pulled over for speeding. It's, you know, have you done something more than that that employers would want to know about. Okay. So if you wanted to register with our agency, which is Silent Night Private Staff, these are the things that you would need. So it's a long list and yeah, all fairly standard, I should think. So different forms for them to fill in. Your enhanced DBS, or they will help you to get that, first aid, certificates, passports, utility bill to prove you are who you say you are, and a smiley photo. Okay, so things to put on your CV. So my suggestion is that your CV should be 2 pages long rather than 30, and include these things. So personal details, an overview of your experience and your skills, your key skills. So, you know, Leanne's going to mention, you know, her experience with multiples, for example, because that's something parents will want to know about. Have you dealt with babies who've had a lot of reflux? Pop that in because parents will want to know about it. Your certifications, courses like this, and your qualifications, your A-levels or that sort of thing, or degrees. A brief work history, especially if you've worked elsewhere before becoming a maternity nurse, maybe you're a childcare or you had a different career before, brief summary of that career, and then 3 family references who can be contacted with their permission. You only put referees on once you have their permission to do so. So, coming on to the interview. So the interview is a 2-way process. You both need to be sure that you're happy with this. But remember, it's not a job in the sense of when you might have, you know, gone for a job and your managers are pretty used to interviewing. They do it every week or month or, you know, every season. Parents often will have no experience of interviewing, so you may well need to lead that conversation. And you can expect parents to ask about your experience and what's important to you. The questions they ask will often lead you to understand more about what's important to them. So they're asking lots of questions about how you'd support breastfeeding. We're going to obviously twig into the fact that this is probably something that they're wanting some support with. They might also want to know a bit more about how it actually works, because unless they've got a very close friend who's had a maternity nurse, they're not really sure. you know, quite how it works in terms of your meals or where you sleep or what you do in the time off, or do you go to sleep when the baby's asleep? So all of these things might need to be asked. But you also need to find out a lot from them, particularly what they're looking for. And I always ask for a tour of the house. You can learn an awful lot about the type of people that you're going to be working with and whether that works for you. Making sure you know where you'd be sleeping. Do ask about how the pregnancy has gone. We know from our, you know, postnatal depression work that a difficult pregnancy and a traumatic birth can lead to postnatal depression. So ask how that pregnancy is going. See if that, you know, it was an IVF pregnancy and they've had lots of losses and miscarriages beforehand, because these things are going to influence how the parents are with their baby and with you. Ask about how they're planning to feed the baby, breastfeeding, formula feeding, mixture. Find out as much as you can about that and their plans. Obviously, be aware that they're likely to change, but it's really important to you know, to find out where they're aiming for. And of course, to be really clear at the interview with what hours and dates they think they're interested in. They don't have to make a decision then, but get a feel for what they're looking for. Are they really only wanting a week or two to help them settle into parenthood? Or are they really thinking we want a good 12 to 16 weeks? So we are, just before we go to speak with Karen, we're going to do a little mock interview. So if you can just take a screenshot of here, we're going to go into pairs and just a couple of minutes each. One of you is going to be the parent and one of you is going to be the maternity nurse. If you have time, we'll swap it round.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm new to this world of Zoom, so sorry if I.
Karen's been busy, so hasn't Zoomed anyone. We're all, you know, well into Zooming things by now.
Yeah. So my background. I'm from Australia. I'm been Northern Hemisphere is my easiest answer to everyone. How long? About 20 years. My background is secondary school teaching in Australia. Teaching, interestingly, secondary school education to vocational childcare, catering, nutrition, that sort of thing. I saw a job for a nanny, and that was advertised in a tiny Australian newspaper in the Bahamas. Went nannying for 8 years because of that tiny little advertisement in a local newspaper, and then was nannying for about 8 years and thought, no, everyone likes bits of paper in Europe, so why don't I do the maternity nurse training, which I did. And I was a little bit arrogant. I was like, I'm a nanny, I've looked after babies, so I can be a maternity nurse. Let's just add another string to the bow. So that's a really condensed version of what it was, but I'm now 11 years into maternity nursing. I decided to do the training simply because I thought, it's another bit of paper, it'll make parents happy. And of course, I can be an amazing maternity nurse because nannies look after babies. What's the issue? And the first 4 years was the biggest learning curve of probably even more so than going to university, I have to say, because I was hands-on with mums and babies. And so I look at every family, I learn something new with every family, even 11 years later. Even if I think you've looked after children, how you work with families is different. And the first 4 years I was exhausted and I was foolish and worked back to back.
You still do that, to be fair.
That's true. I had 6 weeks off when my parents came to Europe, and I've had 3 months off because of COVID.
That is the first time in a long time for you, though.
It's a very long time, yeah. So that's my summary of me.
So we've got some questions to ask you, if that's okay, and if we have time we might add some more in from people in the room, as it were. For the moment, could I just ask everybody else to put themselves on mute, and I'm going to go through the questions that have been sent in. Is that okay? So not Karen, but everybody else. Good stuff. Okay, so I guess first of all, why do you love your job?
Why do I love my job? The easiest answer is I'm a baby junkie. But at the end of the day, I really love caring about these people, and I like helping them. At the end of the day, I love every one of my babies, and I have a little bit of a bad habit. I call them my babies, but I say to the parents, I know they're not my babies, they're your babies, but I'm a workaholic and I live and breathe babies. And I don't know why. It's just who I am. It helps that I don't have a life, but most people have a life, so you have to do a much better job of balancing than what I do. So I love babies. I never knew it to that degree, but you can be creative with them in terms of their development. You teach parents, you support parents. The smallest little bit of information for parents can make the world of difference to them. And every family, I can just say something small, something tiny that they're like, wow, look at what he did when you did that. And that's just what makes my heart melt.
So can you tell us a bit about your typical clients? What are the families that you work with like?
My typical clients, different from the beginning. The beginning is very much, when I first began maternity work, they were short-term bookings and people that just needed the initial help. So they might have been 2 to 3 to 4 week bookings maximum. My typical booking now will be anywhere between 3 to 6 months. Sometimes it's 12 months. So there is no typical with maternity work. I offer a lot of flexibility, so they don't often take it, but I'm quite happy to do transition work. Some families might be on a fairly strict budget, but they're also going to go solo when I leave. So we transition 6, 5, 4 days, and other families 24/7. The job before my current one was 6 months, and 24/7 someone came in on my day off. So I'd like to say there's a typical, but there isn't.
And where do you look, or where might maternity nurses look for work?
To start with agencies. Agencies were my beginning point. I did meet a couple of people in the early days who were starting agencies through a contact who I don't know where I got the contact from. But what I'm seeing now, I was very anti-Facebook for years, and I'm actually being accused of being a Facebook junkie these days for the last 3 years, because there's a lot of work on Facebook. Peers, colleagues will put a job up. Some of the agencies obviously put jobs on Facebook and you go, yeah, that sounds like me. And then you realise you're not registered with them. And by the time you're registered with them, that job's gone. So yeah, it's a case of registering with agencies, but also word of mouth. I've got one lady who got me my very first maternity job 11 years ago, and she got me my job before this, which was 6 months in Mayfair in London, and they just randomly come out of the blue. So it's sort of about knowing a few people, but it's also touching base with agencies. One agency I've been with for 20 years and one consultant has been there the entire time, which is unheard of. And she tends to call me first, second, third about a job before anybody else. And it's just because I've had that relationship with that agency for 20 years. So you want to talk to people, you want to get to know them, and you want them to love you. So I think in the early days of maternity work, even though it goes against the grain, you probably want to go up and beyond, up and over. You want to provide more than what you would typically do, because you want those amazing references. And people will possibly comment to you and say, you shouldn't need to do that, you shouldn't need to do that. But I know in my first few years of maternity work, I did above and beyond anything that was expected, but I had references that then got me further on. So agencies, word of mouth, peers, and even adverts, private adverts are the way to go.
How do you keep yourself safe through using your contract to make sure that you are doing jobs that you're comfortable with and you're treated in a way that you're happy with?
You will always have hiccups, no matter how good your contract is. But basically, at the end of the day, it's contract, contract, contract. And what you will do, your contract will evolve. So the best way that you can keep yourself safe is to evolve your contract, but also obviously in your interview, things that might concern you, raise them, but definitely learn from each of the jobs that you're in. And one prime example that I can give, it actually relates back to my nanny days. I was working in Munich, a family, they had a maternity nurse. I was the nanny for the 2 older boys, and the 2 older boys would never get in the car with me. We didn't have a great relationship. They wanted to be with mum. But mum expected me to drive the maternity nurse and the baby in the back seat of the car that I was taking with them, and the baby was going to stay in the Moses basket on the back seat because she didn't want to wake the baby for the journey. It's like from that point on, every contract for a nanny and a maternity nurse, I now stipulate I will only drive children if they're in a UK regulated car seat by law, or whatever country I'm in. So each job you will learn and your contract will evolve. But at the same time, you've got Facebook now, and you've got these courses that will offer you a huge amount of information. And some of it may seem over the top. Another example, you might want to have in your contract that the room that you're in with the baby, you can open the window. It sounds crazy, but a couple of jobs I've been in, the nursery was 26 degrees and I was melting, and I couldn't function. So talk to people, talk to peers, and make sure that you evolve your contract. That's my main suggestion for everything.
So talking a little more about contracts and pay, when do you expect families to pay in advance? What sort of deposits do you take? Can you advise people a little on that typical industry practice?
Okay, so I think again, you can evolve to a certain extent what you want personally. Industry standard, I would imagine a deposit is a minimum of 1 week. Let's say you've got a 4-week booking, and that's what it was when I started. And I didn't often put, I didn't have deposits in my contract, but of course, my first job that I didn't go forward a week before, 3 years in, the mother cancelled, and at that point I made sure I had a deposit in there. I think a lot of it's a little bit of confidence as well. It's like, really, are they going to pay me up front? But again, I did my training 11 years ago, and things have evolved. We've got Facebook, we've got all of these groups, and we talk to each other, and we're probably trying to set an industry standard more now than when I began, and prior to that. So industry standard, I think the industry standard is about 25%. If you start booking longer bookings, like my 6-month booking that I had, it was over £8,000 deposit. So, you know, it feels quite nerve-wracking, and some families might say to you that's too much, but stay strong. The first time I've negotiated a deposit amount was actually my current booking, which is only 14 days. And it's different, but as you do more bookings, you'll become a little bit more confident in insisting on your deposit. Pay up front, get that deposit, and make sure you only ever have it, your fees that you charge are deducted at the end of the contract. So you're still paid weekly or fortnightly or monthly if that's what you and the family agree, but you have that agreed up front, how you're going to get paid. But do not let them coerce you into having the deposit pay your first week, 2 weeks fees, because if they decide that they don't need you anymore, you haven't got anything to walk away with. So just err on the side of caution. And I've forgotten the rest of part B of that question.
Well, just talking really about what would you do if payment deadlines weren't met?
Okay, payment deadlines. I'm really not a good example of as a role model in this case, but I know what I should do. And if payment deadlines aren't met, it's wise to have in your contract a penalty clause. In terms of problem solving, if you're not getting anywhere and assuming you've got a deposit, if your fees are late and they still haven't paid and you're 2 days in, 3 days in, you might actually then say to them, look, the fees are outstanding plus a penalty. The week deposit covers my last week, so I will be finishing up with you in 4 days' time. And that's what I would say to them. Yes, you'll still be shortchanged an extra week's work, but you haven't worked for nothing. There is a danger that you do the work and then don't get paid. So if they're behind in payments, but you have your week deposit, by day 2, by day 3, say to them, I've got 4 days left this week and I'll be finishing up them because my fees are behind. If they do pay, I think personally I'd be very tempted to then insist on payment in advance of each of those weeks. And all of my international bookings are paid weekly in advance, on top of obviously having the deposit. That would be the best thing. But you don't have a fallback if you don't have a deposit. So that's the best thing that you can do.
So talking a little bit about interviews, how do you know if you and the family are suited?
I'm very much a gut, follow my gut sort of person, but a lot of it is how you end up talking. But obviously, realistically, the parent will ask questions. You hopefully will have questions to ask the parents. You're going to have a similar philosophy, a similar sort of way of caring for and looking after babies. If, for example, you don't believe that a baby should be formula fed and this family's going straight onto formula, it's probably going to be a bit of a clash. Or you may be really happy to go with it. You may believe 100% in breastfeeding and not formula, but you may be able to separate yourself a little bit professionally and act professionally. And so, okay, this is the family's choice. But if you feel that you can't do that personally, then obviously that position isn't for you. How do I know? For me personally, a lot of knowing is the communication, how we talk in the phone call or how we are talking when we're face to face. I like the fact that if I'm in an interview, I can actually have a conversation about the issues with the baby rather than just answering the questions that they might have or me asking them a question and they give a response. You don't want to be in such an intimate working relationship where you can't actually communicate, where it's yes, no, there's the baby's bedding, there's the formula, that's what you do there. You want to be able to chat and be empathetic, and hopefully they're empathetic to you because you're tired, you've been up all night, and they know you're doing a job. Because some families will say, well, you know, I'm waking up all night as well to breastfeed, but they choose to have a child and you've agreed to do a job for them. You haven't agreed to be their favourite niece looking after their child. Yeah. A lot of it's feeling, but it's also rapport in terms of way of thinking, professional beliefs, professional values, and whether you can work alongside of each other. That would be the key thing. Also, remember when you're in those interviews and how do you know, think about things that will affect yourself as well. Obviously, the nursery that you're going to be in, whether they'll even allow you access to the kitchen, which sounds really bizarre. There was one position I was covering someone's days off, only did 6 days, but they did not want the maternity nurse in the kitchen. There was a small bar fridge in the nursery. The sterilizer was in the nursery. We were storing breast milk in that fridge and we had to buy ready-made foods and store them in that little fridge and heat it up in the microwave on top of that fridge. Can you function in that environment? Ask a question. There was a job that I didn't think I wanted. I interviewed with them and I rang the agency and said, I don't think they're for me. They're too alternate for me. And fortunately, I rang the agency before I had even sort of reached the end of the street. And then you let the agency deal with it. But if you're doing it personally, it's a little bit tricky. But you'll get more confident to be able to decline a position if you want to. I've declined a position because the apartment was up 3 floors and there was no elevator. I don't want to be carrying a baby up and down 3 flights of stairs, not only for health and safety, but you lose a lot of spontaneity going outside. So work out what works for you, what will work for the family. Some things you'll never find out until you're actually in situ. So you might just have to live with things, or you might sort of say, oh, I couldn't, this really isn't going to work for me. But in the interview, think of all the worst case scenarios and put it in a positive question and see if you can inquire. Another job that I wasn't so keen on, again, 3 floors up. I hadn't been into the home and I was communicating by telephone with the family, not even video FaceTime. And for some reason, I thought to ask about the apartment. And as soon as she said it was 3 floors up and it was only 12 months ago, I was like, I so don't want this job. But I didn't want to say to her, I didn't want to cut the mother off and say, I don't want the job. So I actually increased my fees by £30 a day just to sort of try and put her off, because she could easily get someone cheaper than me. And she called me back 2 days later and offered me the job. And I was just like, not what I wanted. But I accepted it because I knew that it was going to be good money in the end. But it was well earned, I can assure you.
So thinking about working in the client's home, what sort of things do you do in your free time? And can you talk to us a little bit about when maternity nurses tend to take free time, for how long?
Ooh, standard free time once upon a time used to be 3 hours. Now the standard is 4 hours, or I believe the standard's 4 hours.
I agree, yes.
So you definitely want to have your break time in at 4 hours. When do you take the break? I think, again, it's very subject to family and what their needs are, whether they're quite independent or whether they need you at their beck and call. But it's certainly worth negotiating. And I think in a beginning maternity role, if I'd had the confidence, and I like to think that you who are training now, and again with Facebook groups and different groups where you've got lots of information available to you, you would have the confidence to say to the parents, when do you feel is most convenient? Let's fix that in the contract, and it's generally the same time each day. Again, I'm a little bit of a black sheep, and my break times I offer to the parents to make it when it's convenient to them. But again, you can get burnt. So I'd start off fairly defined with what you think is appropriate. And of course, offer your clients a bit of flexibility. The appointment for the 6-week check might be at a certain time. Would they like you to accompany them, or are they happy to go independently? I like to go because I think 2 sets of ears, or 3 sets if the parents are going, hear things differently to what the parents come home and tell you. And it's not about them not telling you all the information. It's just that we interpret things differently. And by you having that information, you've actually also got a discussion point with your parents that you're working with. So your breaks in there, make sure that you do offer them flexibility. You don't want to go in and say, this is how it is, there's no leeway, because they will find someone that has negotiation room and leeway. So please, offer your parents flexibility, but realistic flexibility, because you're there to care and nurture them. And care and nurture for their babies. I know you're not in a doula role, but if the mother's breastfeeding, you need to help the mother facilitate successful breastfeeding. So make sure she's got the water next to her, make sure she's had some food, Be that facilitator, be that carer, but make sure that self-care is in place, that you outline that in the contract. And Caroline, I think you need to bring me back on focus, because I realise I start to waffle.
Well, the next question that had been submitted was to talk about, have you had any conversations with families in regard to following UK guidance, for example, around perfect prep machines, safe sleep, where the families perhaps were not as keen to do what you were intending?
I do make the guidelines part of my contract. Again, that's having experience, different experiences, different families. In the early days, you know, temperature of room, I was super strict about and tried to be super strict. I think ideally we should be, but I allow a tiny bit more leeway now. I'm sort of up to 21 degrees, but then if you're in an environment where it's physically impossible to cool the house, you have to adapt. But UK guidelines, you don't want to be working in an environment where you put yourself at risk. So try and make that a point of conversation with the parents, possibly in the interview, or if it's not all covered, it's in your contract and it can be a talking point. But also you can sort of say to them, well, when the baby comes home and we're in a few days, let's talk about some of these things. They get a whole lot of brochures, safe sleep, safe feeding, lots of guidelines. So in those pamphlets and that paraphernalia. And I would say 90% of the time, although ideally they should have, the parents won't have even had a moment's breath to open those brochures. So it can be as simple as, you know, have you had a moment to look at these? Maybe would you like me to go through and highlight the key things in there, and leave it with them to maybe have a brief look when you know that they're going to have a moment. Or choose your timing. You also can't sit down and sort of say to them, okay, we need to talk about SIDS right now, because it's a really hard topic to talk about, because, you know, they've got this new baby and then you're introducing the possibility of something awful happening to their baby. So it needs to be addressed, and it needs to, if you can also make yourself out to be the bad guy. You know, unfortunately, we need to do this because it's good for the baby. I understand if you decide that you don't want to as parents, but I unfortunately can't work in those situations or with those things not being carried out, because I am responsible in this situation. So do make sure that you have somehow covered, but make sure it's in the contract. And one of the latest things we've talked about with contracts is don't just get the parents to sign the last page. It's worth at least trying to ensure that the parents have read each page of your contract. Some of our contracts can be 2 pages. Hopefully they're not 1 page in these days, but my feeling, what I'm seeing, my contract is around 7 or 8 pages. I know some ladies have 12-page contracts, and a lot of parents will scan them and not realise what they've read. So, you know, you can just clarify, rather than sort of tell them, oh, we're doing this wrong. Can I clarify this with you? Can we just talk about something? I'm a little bit puzzled about this. What are your thoughts on this in relation to the guidelines? So it's a much better way to sort of put it in a positive frame and reflect slightly negatively on yourself, so that, oh, it'd be, do you mind explaining that to me? I haven't really understood why we do it this way. Or have you thought about this? I like your idea there, and here's another idea. Because it's very easy when we haven't had a lot of experience. Oh no, we've been told that you can't do that. And a new parent doesn't need to be told, especially if they're first-time parents, they're doing it wrong. That's generally not going to work. And then it's sort of, they feel like maybe they're being bullied or they're not being cared about, and they're trying to enjoy their first baby. So nurture them with positive questions that lead on to where you're going. I think that's
Great
how
stuff.
I say it.
Have you spent much time working with babies with reflux or other conditions?
Okay, my first 4 years was the biggest learning curve of my life. For some reason, I jinxed, I think, every reflux baby in London for the first 4 years of my maternity career, having never heard anything about reflux, knew nothing about it. And my first job was 3 months. And this baby, fortunately, was what we call a happy spitter. But she ate and she vomited. She ate and she vomited. And she never slept more than 20 minutes in the daytime in a block. And maybe she did that 2-3 times if I was lucky, and never slept more than 2 hours at night. If I was lucky. And in some occasions that was in a bouncy chair, which was not appropriate, in a cot, but I had to stay awake with her the whole night. So there's a lot of reflux about. Someone's looked after me and blessed me for the last 4 years. I've not had a single reflux baby in 4 years. And I'm just saying thank you. Some reflux is easy, some reflux is not easy. And again, it will be your experience that leads you down that path of being confident. You won't have all the answers if you haven't experienced reflux with babies. But be the researcher, be the person that looks up information and mention to the parents, oh, I was just reading about this. Maybe we can ask the doctor about this. In some situations, you'll find that you discover more than the information that the doctor offers. You're not the doctor, though. You're not the medical practitioner. So, you can say, I've heard about this, maybe we can ask the doctor. What are your thoughts on talking to the doctor about this when we next see them? In some cases, it's definitely worth being on the case if this baby's in pain and distressed and the parents sort of are not super proactive. You may need to be the bad guy in a sense and push the parents. Have you managed to get a doctor's appointment? Would you like me to ring and make a doctor's appointment? I know you're on hold for a long time. Maybe hand the phone to me if you're on hold and you can finish what you're doing, and I'll bring the phone back to you when we're not on hold. Premature babies. I've had one baby who was 4 weeks prem, but he was discharged and sent home 3 days later. It was, and that's the only reason I was in that booking, because their maternity nurse wasn't booked for another 4 weeks. So I haven't really had much preterm. I had one baby who wasn't breathing when he was born. The parents had no intention of having a maternity nurse, but of course this little boy was born not breathing and they were panicked. When he went home a week later, I was with them for the first 10 days, I think. And so supporting them because they were just terrified that he might not breathe, or they were fearful of hurting him, or not putting him down safely. Again, it's about support and it's about getting the information. And if you can, at all possible, try and be there for doctor's appointments, especially with babies who are unwell. Because it really does make a difference hearing the information from a doctor. Parents are emotional and they interpret what they're hearing, sometimes very factually, but some of it's distorted by emotion. So please, maybe it might be worth sacrificing a break if they say, no, you don't need to come because it's your break time. A couple of times I'm like, no, I'm happy to. I won't even charge you for my break time. Because for me, that information's valuable. And it will make future days possibly a little bit easier. Was it worth sacrificing a 4-hour break? For me, it was. And some of them may actually charge you. You may charge them and they don't have a problem with that. So it swings and roundabouts. I think in that case, if the parents are being a bit tight with money, it's still probably worth not being paid. But maybe you go 50-50 with them, or maybe you have an extended break on another day. Make sure if you've got unwell babies or there's been a history of medical issues, do try and attend those medical appointments, especially if you're there for a long booking.
Right, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our prepared questions. I'm just going to give just a few minutes if people do want to ask something that has come up in the course of the interview, if you have time to do that. Is that okay with you?
I have time. My baby is with mummy and daddy.
Great stuff. Does anyone want to ask something additional to what we asked on the pre-ordered questions?
I've got a question. Hi.
Sure. Hi.
Do you prefer to work with first-time parents or parents that have a sibling?
Good question. I love first-time parents. Probably because I'm a bit of a control freak, probably because I'm a bit bossy. I hope I try to temper my teaching, my guidance, and I try not to be bossy, but I do really like first-time parents because you've got so much to offer them. They're a little bit more nervous. I would suggest if you haven't worked as a maternity nurse before in private homes, my first booking was a second baby, I think, and I did quite a bit of troubleshooting to start with, a bit of sleep, a bit of weaning between bookings, because it took a bit of time to build up.
Yeah.
But first-time parents, I love them to pieces because they love you to pieces because you're
great for you.
Generally, primarily I do first-time bookings, but if I'm free, I always go back to my families that have number 2 and 3 because they know how I work, I know how they are. And it's always lovely to see number 1. I think I've got 3 families that have had 2 children, 2 families with 3, and a couple of people that have passed me on to their best friend. But first time is great. Second and third is fabulous with a family that loved you the first time. Yeah,
I agree. I love pea and a stick bookings when you've been with them before, and
Yeah.
so that you know number 1, and then they send you a pea on the stick photo with "Would you come?"
Would you come? And sometimes you get that message before the husband even knows.
Yes. Did anyone else have a question for Karen? Okay, well we did submit questions in advance. So that just means I've been super efficient. So my last question was, what's the weirdest or strangest thing that's happened during your time as a maternity nurse?
I couldn't even come up with an answer to that. That's I mean, the worst thing that's happened, well, probably not the worst, but I guess in hindsight most embarrassing to an extent, was I'd met with the family before. I was going in as a bit of a troubleshoot. They'd had problems, difficulty with breastfeeding. She didn't have a good supply of breast milk. I think the baby was probably about 4 weeks. The meeting/interview went really well. And I thought, yeah, sure, I can do this. Great. I turned up and we started. And within 4 or 5 hours, I knew the booking wasn't going to work. But the lady that had put me in the position, I thought, I won't annoy her over the weekend. I think I went in on a Thursday or a Friday. I'll just leave it. And then Monday, I'll message her and just say, this is just not going to work out. Mum had such a low supply of breast milk that the milk that she did express, which was very minimal, they treated it like far more than gold. I was only allowed to offer 20 to 30 ml amounts after the baby had breastfed with mum. So baby wasn't getting much, but baby was also tired. So baby would drain the bottle and they'd think that it was enough. And they wanted to preserve the milk that they had for future feeds. And this baby would be hungry 30 minutes later, 20 minutes later, an hour later. And a few times I said, you know, let's put more in there. And it's like, we don't want it to waste. And a couple of times I did it without their permission as such. And this baby just inhaled the 60 or the 90 mils. And I could not talk them around. I really could not talk them around to, your baby is hungry. Part of the reason we can't get her to settle or to go for periods is because she's not getting enough food in a setting. Monday morning, I messaged the agency and said, Louise, this just isn't going to work. I need you to talk to the clients. I need to leave. There's no way this can work. The mother's first name started with L. So you can imagine what happened. She got the message, but I didn't know. I just wondered why my agent never got back to me for 2 or 3 days. And I'm like, this is really weird that Louise hasn't called me. So then I chased her up and she said, did you send me a message? And it's like, yeah, I didn't get it. You sent it to the mother. And yeah, but they hadn't told me for the 3 days that they had this message. We just kept going on. So that was quite uncomfortable. And then when I finally was told by the agent, they wanted me out of the house within an hour. So it was very
all that time that it wasn't working.
It wasn't working. So, just be careful of your text messages. I've done that once and you've done it again.
And any super happy memories?
Super happy memories. 12 months with one family. 12 months with a single mum who had IVF, who was she was 47. We had an amazing relationship. And he is my little man. He will be in my life forever. But all of my babies are precious. I do enjoy the jobs with travel. A private plane every now and again is a bit of a luxury.
Not bad, is it?
It's not bad. And the client saying to you, what time do you think's best for the baby? What time should we land in New York? It was pretty much up to me what time our flight was scheduled because it was best for baby M.
Absolutely it was.
Indulgent. The only downfall about those is if you sign up for frequent flyer points or miles,
You don't get any.
they don't give you any mileage.
They don't. But hey, the food's great on private planes. You're personal chefs. So just
I haven't had that one.
Have you not? Oh, beautiful fruit patties.
Planes.
Beautiful. Oh yes, the private chef came.
But ladies that haven't done maternity, like a few bookings, sorry, you have to work your way up to that. You can't have
That's not straight in there, is it? The private jets. We work towards that. Thank you really for your time. I think Karen deserves a round of applause for being so amazing.
So any questions, anytime, just text me or email me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Right, okay. We are just going to finish off now with a little bit about our assignment. So I'm just waiting to hear back from Manta when they're going to be issuing your assignment. It's just getting rechecked by OCN, which is the awarding body. I don't know if I mentioned at the start, we've actually rewritten the course entirely for you guys going online. So we've had to make some changes and we're waiting for OCN just to finish that part of the assessment, and then they'll be able to send it out to you. So we'll let you know as soon as we can when that will be. So it may not be next week as according to the slide, it may be a little later. So I'll need for your assignment your video submissions on the paced feeding, safe sleep and swaddling, the quiz that a couple of you have already sent me on the illnesses, and then you'll have your written assignment. And it consists of a selection of the long and short questions, and if it's more than a few sentences, it actually has a word count that you need to do as a minimum. But everything in the assessment has been covered in the course or the written resources or the webinar videos. So please refer back to all of those. If you are coming across really can't find that, just drop me an email on the Facebook page and I can direct you to the resources. Something to be really aware of is plagiarism, and I've been marking some assessments recently from the previous course where I want to make sure this is very well explained to you guys. This plagiarism is using someone else's work and passing it off as your own. So if you copy and paste from the internet, even if you're changing a few words, that is still plagiarism. If you're rewriting someone else's ideas but pretending they are yours, that is plagiarism. So if you are using materials either from within the course that we have given you or from outside of the course, you do need to cite it. It's not a degree, so we don't need a referencing system, but you do need to say this is from and where you found it, either a book or an article or the internet reference. So any assignments which are simply cut and pasted, or we're copying, and obviously I know all you guys, I know the material very, very well that you'll be referring to. So if it's not yours, it's someone else's or it's mine, and it's not cited, that would be a fail on the course. But it's not an academic course. I'm not expecting you to go into referencing software and certain means. As long as I can see that this is your thoughts and this is from someone or another resource, and you have just said where that is, that will be absolutely fine. Just some simple basics, full sentences and paragraphs rather than bullets. Spell and grammar check your work, please. It's not an English test, but it's just really much nicer to read work that someone has spent some time checking. Just to define where the coursework says explain, that means giving reasons why or something is or isn't true, which might indicate about what's happened or why something happens or how it happens. Analyze is comparing and contrasting often 2 different approaches or 3 different approaches with advantages and disadvantages of each, and then coming to your own conclusion, demonstrating what your views are on that topic. And you'll get this paperwork through, so no need to copy them down, but if you're looking for places to go, here are some recommended resources. So if you use these resources, I'd actually expect the whole of the hyperlinks, so not just BASIS, but the page you went to on BASIS. You can copy and paste the hyperlink into your assignment, or you may be looking at books that you already own or from the library or other resources. So we just make sure really clear about where you're finding information. And a new webinar up was from Professor Amy Brown, and that's on evidence-based information. So I do recommend that you listen to that webinar before you do your assignment, because it talks a lot about where to look for this type of information and what to value and what to maybe question when you're looking on the internet. Because of course on the internet you can find any answer to any question however you ask it. So you can find evidence for formula feeding and evidence for breastfeeding, for example. So you need to know what you're looking at and why. These are just some indications back from Silent Light training about what their expectation is in terms of putting your name on it. Years as a teacher, put your name on things. That was pretty much the end of every day. Name your work. Please also do that for us. If you have assessment questions around how, should I be doing this? Can I have an extension? I don't understand this. Please direct them to the email address Manta Coursework. If it's just a question of, I just can't remember where we did this in the course, you can ask me that on the Facebook. But if it's questions about how to do the assignment, please do pass that back through Manta and they will help you, or they'll contact me if needs be. And if you are struggling at all, one of us has already got hospitalised, bless her, then please let them know, not me, but as soon as possible that you might need an extension or you're struggling. It's really usual when you first submit your assessment for it to come back to you with some minor amendments and changes. That does not mean you failed. That is completely normal and to be expected. I will be surprised if more than 1 or 2 people on the course, on any of these courses, would have no corrections. Corrections are to be expected and welcomed, because that's just a chance for you to look further in and just explore something else in more detail. So when you get your corrections, just refer back to the comments, refer back to the materials, and then resubmit it with your comments or additions in a new colour so we know what's been added, because generally someone else will mark that and they want to see what's been added. If you choose to continue to a level 4 qualification, which we're going to be offering in November, I think it is, there are 4 more sessions like these, a few more wonderful webinars to listen to, and a top-up part of the assignment. So it's not the same again, it's an extra few questions going into a little more depth than on the topics that we are covering in level 4. So that's coming up in November. Any other questions on that, Simon, or any other reflections?
No, I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I'm glad.
Really enjoyed
So
it.
it's the first time we've done it like this, so I was a bit nervous of how it was going to go, not seeing you guys in person, not having, you know, dolls and baby baths and all the stuff we normally have together in a room. So yeah, it's been.
I feel like I've spoken a lot.
It's been
Sorry?
really nice because I've had a couple of other courses I've done online, but they haven't been Zoom based.
Mhm.
So it's kind of been independent learning.
Yeah.
As ordinarily you'd be all together in a place. So it's been
Which is
really
very much what we
really-
didn't want to offer. That, you know, that is a thing, and it's not what I wanted to do. I think this is the type of learning that you actually need those discussions. You need to bounce off each other, hear from people with different experiences, rather than just being an echo chamber of the learning and just you need to see, well, that happened to that person. They've got a new view on this, and you know what, I've you know, changed my slides with you guys saying, oh, I do this and add it in, because we're all learning from each other.
Yeah, I feel like the Zoom has definitely helped for the practical side.
Yeah, I mean, practical would be better in person, no doubt.
Yeah.
You know, having to try and do things on a video camera is not easy, but yeah, we make what we make of it.
Yeah.
Better than not having the training, because hopefully now COVID is you know, kind of starting to ease off, the work is coming back in, parents are, you know, actually gearing up now to go back to work, and that means more people are going to be looking for this. Great stuff. Okay, well, I'm going to say goodbye, but not really goodbye, because I'm going to be there on the Facebook group, you know, for however long.
Yeah.
We've got some new people joined because we've got a sleep support course this weekend. So that's my weekend, all about sleep. So they're joining us on the Facebook group as well. And so hopefully we're going to really start to build a little Manta community of people who've trained together and can support each other sharing work, sharing ideas, and just there for each other, you know, when you've had a difficult day or when you've had something to celebrate. So if you're not on it already, please join. And yeah, I hope to see more of you there and on future courses.
Thank you, Caroline.
Have a great rest of the summer. Keep safe. Keep well.
Keep safe. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Ladies.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.